It was a night like any other at the remote military listening post, the kind of place most people didn't even know existed, hidden in a nondescript building surrounded by mountains. The post was manned by a handful of technicians and intelligence officers, all trained to monitor signals, communications, and any unusual activity across the globe. The screens flickered quietly in the dim light, green letters and numbers scrolling down in a hypnotic rhythm. The air smelled faintly of coffee and electronic equipment. Most of the people there were used to long nights of silence, listening to nothing more than the usual chatter of ships at sea, routine aircraft communications, and static that sometimes sounded eerily like voices. But that night, something unusual appeared on the monitors. A faint signal, weak and irregular, blinked onto the screen. At first, it seemed like nothing. These listening posts were accustomed to picking up false signals all the time. The ocean alone created interference that could confuse even the most advanced equipment. Yet this signal had a strange rhythm, one that made the technicians sit up straight. It wasn't like the random noise they were used to. There was a pattern, a certain urgency hidden in the way the signal repeated itself. One of the younger technicians, barely out of training, leaned closer to the screen. "Sir, I think we have something unusual," he said, his voice a mixture of excitement and unease. His supervisor, a man who had seen decades of similar nights, frowned at the screen. "Show me," he said calmly, though a flicker of tension crossed his face. Calm was necessary in places like this, but deep down, every officer knew that calm could vanish in a heartbeat if the signal meant what they feared it might. As they examined the signal more closely, it became clear that this wasn't random. It wasn't interference. It was a distress call, but not an ordinary one. The message contained a coded pattern, a kind of secret signature that only certain elite forces in the military and intelligence agencies were trained to recognize. It was the kind of code that was rarely used, reserved for situations so dangerous that only the most skilled and prepared operatives could handle them. The realization hit them slowly, but it was chilling. A distress call like this didn't happen by accident. It wasn't a civilian calling for help, and it wasn't an ordinary military unit in trouble. This was a signal designed to awaken the attention of humanity's deadliest warriors, people who lived on the edge of danger every day. These were operatives who had trained for years to handle missions that no one else could, missions that required skill, courage, and a willingness to face situations where survival was never guaranteed. In the command center halfway across the world, officers received the same signal. The protocol was simple but strict. If the coded distress call was detected, it had to be verified immediately. Once verified, an alert went out, quietly but urgently, to the top-ranking officers who were authorized to make decisions about elite deployments. Within minutes, the normally quiet rooms of the listening post and the command centers filled with a tense energy. Phones buzzed, secure lines lit up, and the air felt thick with anticipation. Everyone knew that something extraordinary was happening, something that could escalate into a life-or-death situation for anyone involved. The distress signal repeated itself, almost like a heartbeat, persistent and insistent. Each repetition seemed louder, more urgent. In the minds of those listening, it didn't matter how experienced they were. There was a natural human reaction to a call for help that could not be ignored. They studied the coordinates embedded in the signal, the timestamps and the encoded details. The information hinted at a location that was remote, hard to reach, and extremely dangerous. There were no roads, no simple way to get there, and yet someone or something needed immediate assistance. The people at the listening post felt a mixture of fear and awe. They had been trained to handle emergencies, but rarely did they encounter a situation that demanded the intervention of the very best operatives in the world. They knew the risks involved. Whatever had sent the distress call was likely in extreme danger, and reaching them would not be easy. Any misstep could cost lives, not just of the people in danger, but of the teams that would be sent to help. Yet, despite the risk, there was a shared understanding. Ignoring this call was not an option. Humanity's safety, or at least the lives of those trapped in that remote area, depended on action. As hours passed, analysts worked tirelessly to confirm the authenticity of the message. They cross-checked satellite data, previous communications, and intelligence reports. Nothing seemed out of place except for one crucial fact. The urgency of the call and the code itself made it clear that this situation was extraordinary. It wasn't a routine distress call. It was a signal meant to mobilize the most elite forces on the planet. These were the people who usually operated in secret, whose existence many didn't even know. They were called upon in the most desperate situations, when ordinary soldiers, police, or rescue teams could not possibly handle the threat. The thought of who might respond to this call added to the intensity of the night. The operators, the analysts, and the officers all imagined faces of the elite warriors they knew from intelligence briefings. These were individuals with skills honed in the harshest environments: desert warfare, jungle survival, deep-sea operations, hostage rescues in the most hostile areas, and missions that required working alone behind enemy lines. Each one of them had survived situations that seemed impossible. They had done what others thought could never be done, and yet, even knowing who would be coming, The people monitoring the signal felt a twinge of uncertainty. There was something mysterious about this situation that even the experts could not fully understand. Why was such a high-level distress call being sent now? What kind of danger had escalated to this point? The unknown added a layer of tension that made every second feel like an hour. They knew that mobilizing these warriors would change everything, that lives hung in the balance, and that once the call was acknowledged, events would move faster than anyone could imagine. Finally, after careful verification, the command center confirmed the signal's authenticity. The decision was made to activate the protocol. Within minutes, top-level officials began sending secure alerts to the elite units across the globe. The quiet night turned into a flurry of activity. Phones rang off the hook, encrypted messages were dispatched, and teams began preparing for deployment. Every movement was precise, rehearsed, and calculated. There was no room for error. These operatives, known for their ability to handle the impossible, would soon be moving toward an unknown danger. At the listening post, the technicians continued monitoring the signal, now aware that their part in this story was critical. Every beep, every pulse, and every code sequence mattered. They watched as the coordinates were analyzed, as plans were being drawn up for rapid deployment, and as the gears of a global response began to turn. Though they were far from the front line, they felt the weight of the moment. A single distress call had just set into motion actions that could change lives and potentially prevent disaster outside. The night remained still. The mountains stood silent. The wind whispered through the trees. And yet inside the listening post, history was quietly unfolding. A message had arrived, unexpected and urgent, and it had already begun to awaken some of the most skilled warriors humanity had ever trained. The world did not know it yet, but soon. These operatives would be on a mission that could test the limits of human courage and skill. The night had begun like any other, but by the time it ended, the first steps of an extraordinary story had already been set in motion. A story that began with a faint signal and would lead to heroism, danger, and a confrontation that no one could have predicted. The moment the distress signal was confirmed, the world of elite forces shifted into motion with almost frightening precision. Far from the quiet listening posts and command centers, in hidden bases scattered across continents, teams of operatives stirred from their routine lives. These were not ordinary soldiers, not even the best-known units. They were the kind of people who existed in shadows, trained for missions so dangerous that most civilians didn't even believe they existed. Their skills were honed over years of intense training, missions that tested not only their physical strength but also their mental endurance, their ability to make split-second decisions under impossible pressure. They were humanity's deadliest warriors, and now the world needed them. As soon as the orders arrived, the response was immediate. Notifications flashed on secure devices, encrypted messages delivered in seconds to operatives across multiple countries. Families were informed in the most discreet way possible, often in a single, carefully worded sentence. "You have been called to duty. Leave immediately." For the warriors, there was no discussion, no negotiation. They knew that when the call came, hesitation could cost lives. Instantly, routines were abandoned, beds were left unmade, meals half-eaten, and personal belongings were packed in seconds. For them, speed was a weapon, and efficiency was a matter of survival. In private hangars, transport planes and helicopters were being prepped for takeoff, vehicles capable of traveling over rough terrain, boats ready for stormy seas, and even small, discreet aircraft capable of undetected travel were assigned to the teams. Every detail had to be perfect. A single mistake could jeopardize the mission before it even began. The warriors themselves were already reviewing mission files, analyzing the limited information they had from the distress call, running through every possible scenario in their minds. They had been trained to anticipate threats that others could not even imagine, and yet every mission had a level of uncertainty that made even the most experienced operators tense. Among the teams were specialists in fields most people had only seen in movies or read about in books. Some were experts in demolitions, able to safely neutralize explosive threats in seconds. Others were trained in close-quarters combat, capable of disarming multiple armed enemies simultaneously. There were trackers who could read footprints, signs of movement, and even the faintest traces left behind by someone trying to hide. There were medical specialists who could save lives in the most extreme conditions, using only what they had on hand. Every team member had a role, every skill was vital, and every second of preparation mattered. The psychological weight of the mission was heavy. While these operatives were accustomed to danger, this mission carried a unique intensity. The distress call was coded in a way that indicated immediate and extreme peril. Whatever or whoever was calling for help was in a situation so dire that only the absolute best could respond. The stakes were not only life and death for those in danger, but also potentially for the operatives themselves. They knew that every choice they made, every step they took, could lead to survival or disaster. Yet, despite the fear, there was a shared resolve. This was their duty. It was the reason they had trained for years, enduring hardships that most people could not imagine. As teams assembled, the coordination was remarkable. Different units, often from different countries and agencies, had to operate together seamlessly. Despite rarely working with each other before, trust had to be instantaneous. Communication protocols were rehearsed to the point of instinct, and every team member knew exactly how to respond to the smallest signal from a teammate. The planning rooms were filled with maps, satellite images, and intelligence reports. Analysts briefed the warriors on the terrain, possible threats, and environmental conditions. Weather reports, satellite feeds, and even social intelligence were all considered to ensure the teams could reach their targets safely and efficiently. Time was critical. The distress signal was repeating at intervals, a silent countdown that reminded everyone involved that delay was not an option. Every passing minute could worsen the situation for those calling for help. Teams moved with precision, leaving bases in small groups to avoid detection, boarding vehicles that would take them halfway around the world in hours. The travel itself was perilous. Some routes required stealth, avoiding radar and enemy surveillance. Others involved navigating dangerous natural terrain, mountains, deserts, and forests where a wrong step could be fatal. Yet these warriors had done this before countless times. They relied on their instincts, their training, and their unwavering focus on the mission. In addition to the physical preparations, there was a mental preparation that few outsiders could understand. These warriors were trained to control fear, to remain calm in the face of chaos, and to adapt to situations that changed by the second. Yet, even the most experienced among them felt a surge of anticipation. The knowledge that this distress call represented an extreme threat added a silent tension to every action. They knew that once they arrived, the situation might be worse than anything they had faced before. Every mission carried danger, but this call was different. It demanded not just skill, but courage on a level that few ever had to summon. As the hours passed, the teams converged on central departure points. Aircraft engines roared to life, vehicles rumbled over tarmacs, and communication lines buzzed with coded messages confirming departure times and coordinates. Families said quick goodbyes, sometimes with tears, sometimes with silent nods. For many, these were not just missions, they were life-or-death encounters that could end careers, lives, or even the world's safety. Yet, the warriors accepted it without hesitation. They knew that fear was a tool, not a weakness, and that courage was measured, not in the absence of fear but in action despite it. Each operative carried specialized equipment tailored to the unknown threats they might face. Night vision goggles, advanced weaponry, portable communication devices, medical kits, and even survival tools capable of withstanding extreme conditions. Every piece of gear had a purpose, and every team member knew how to use it instinctively. The combination of technology and human skill created an unstoppable force, designed to operate in environments where ordinary forces would fail. As the first waves of teams took off toward their unknown destination, a sense of determination filled the air. Despite the risks, despite the uncertainty, there was a quiet confidence in their actions. They were trained to handle the impossible, and they had done it countless times before. Yet, each mission was unique, and this distress call promised a level of danger that would test every limit of their abilities. The world outside remained unaware of the extraordinary operation unfolding, but inside the hidden bases and aircraft, humanity's deadliest warriors were moving into position, ready to confront the unknown and answer the call for help that could change everything. Even as the planes disappeared into the night sky, leaving a trail of lights over oceans and mountains, the anticipation remained. The journey had begun, but the true test awaited. The warriors knew that what lay ahead was not just a mission, it was a confrontation with danger that could decide lives, outcomes, and even the fate of people far beyond the immediate scene. The distress call had done its job. It had awakened the deadliest, most prepared individuals, the ones whose names few knew and whose actions would remain secret. And now, the story that had begun with a faint, mysterious signal was moving closer to its most critical phase, one where courage, skill, and determination would be the only thing standing between disaster and salvation. The journey to the coordinates from the distress signal was not simple. The elite teams had already left their bases hours ago, but the path ahead tested every skill they had ever learned. From the very first moment they were airborne or on the ground, danger seemed to follow them like a shadow. The world they were moving through was unpredictable. Storms brewed over mountains, sandstorms whipped across deserts, and turbulent seas threatened to overturn even the most secure vessels. Yet these warriors had trained for the unexpected. Their mission was clear, and they had to reach their destination no matter what obstacles lay in their way. Each team moved along a different path, carefully chosen to maximize speed while minimizing detection. Some flew in low-altitude helicopters, skimming treetops and valleys to avoid radar. Others navigated rough seas in small, fast boats, cutting through waves with precision. A few teams were assigned to move overland, trekking through forests and rocky terrain, carrying supplies, weapons, and communication devices that could survive extreme conditions. Every movement was calculated, every action planned with military precision, yet they were all ready to adapt. In these missions, flexibility was as important as skill. The slightest delay or miscalculation could compromise the entire operation. Even with planning, the teams encountered immediate challenges. Weather turned against them at unexpected moments. Helicopters were buffeted by sudden gusts, waves threatened to capsize boats, and rocky paths slowed the overland teams. Communication lines occasionally faltered, and satellite feeds provided incomplete or delayed information. Yet, the warriors were undeterred. They were trained to operate in the absence of certainty, to rely on their instincts and experience when technology failed. Every obstacle they overcame added to their momentum, each success giving them confidence that they could face what was waiting at the end of the journey. As they neared the location indicated by the distress call, intelligence reports began to arrive with alarming details. The area was not only remote but heavily contested. Satellite images and intercepted communications suggested that hostile forces were converging on the same location. Perhaps aware of the distress signal and intending to prevent any rescue, the operatives had to act faster than anyone could anticipate. Their mission had shifted from a rescue to a race against time, where the safety of those in danger and the success of the mission depended on every second. The terrain itself was a formidable challenge. Mountains rose sharply from the ground, with narrow paths that could only be navigated on foot. Dense forests concealed hidden dangers in stable ground, traps, or even ambush points. Rivers and streams blocked direct paths, requiring careful planning and sometimes dangerous crossings. Every team carried not only weapons and supplies but also survival gear, ready to endure harsh conditions for extended periods if necessary. They had trained for extreme environments, but each step toward the target tested their endurance, patience, and focus. Communication was vital, yet intermittent. The teams relied on secure lines that sometimes cut out, forcing them to improvise. Hand signals, prearranged codes, and instinctive understanding among teammates became their primary method of coordination. Each operative knew the role of others perfectly. Some scouted ahead, identifying potential threats or obstacles. Others maintained secure communications with command centers to provide updates and request additional intelligence. Every movement had to be synchronized to prevent errors that could jeopardize the mission. The psychological pressure was enormous. Every operative knew that the situation was urgent, that the distress signal represented a life-or-death scenario. At the same time, they were aware of the dangers waiting for them: enemy forces, environmental hazards, and even the possibility of betrayal or misinformation meant that trust and decision-making had to be flawless. The warriors relied on their training, but even that could not erase the tension in the pit of their stomachs. Fear, adrenaline, and determination blended together, sharpening their focus and driving them forward. As the teams approached the target zone, they began to see signs of the danger awaiting them. Smoke rose in the distance, marking areas of destruction. Movement among trees and buildings suggested the presence of hostile forces lying in wait. Civilians or innocent bystanders might already be caught in the middle. The operatives had to anticipate every scenario, preparing for ambushes, traps, and rapidly changing conditions. They reviewed their plans in seconds, adjusting based on what they could see and what their intelligence predicted. Each decision carried weight, and mistakes could have immediate, irreversible consequences. Despite the tension, the warriors operated with remarkable precision. Each team member moved with purpose, following protocols drilled into them through years of training. Reconnaissance teams scouted paths, marking safe zones and identifying hazards. Assault teams prepared for entry points, weapons ready and focused. Medical specialists ensured that everyone was prepared for injuries or unexpected incidents. The entire operation was a delicate balance of speed, caution, and skill, executed under extreme pressure. Along the way, the teams encountered unexpected challenges. Bridges had collapsed, roads were blocked by debris, and wildlife or environmental hazards created further obstacles. Each time, the operatives adapted instantly. Using ropes, climbing gear, and specialized vehicles, they overcame physical barriers that would have stopped ordinary people. Their movements were fluid, almost instinctive, demonstrating the intense training and experience that made them humanity's deadliest warriors. Every step forward was a small victory, bringing them closer to the location and the lives in danger. As night fell, visibility decreased, adding another layer of difficulty. The teams activated night vision equipment, relying on minimal light to move safely. The darkness concealed threats but also provided an advantage, allowing them to approach undetected. The sound of helicopters, the splash of water, and the crunch of boots on gravel were all carefully controlled to avoid alerting any enemies. Every noise, every movement, was calculated, blending strategy and stealth into a coordinated effort that left nothing to chance. The journey also revealed the resilience of the human spirit. Even under exhaustion, stress, and physical pain, the operatives pressed on. Blisters, bruises, and fatigue were ignored. Focus and determination carried them forward. In quiet moments, when the immediate danger seemed distant, thoughts of those calling for help motivated them further. They knew lives hung in the balance, and failure was not an option. The combination of duty, skill, and moral responsibility drove them forward. Through every hardship, by the time the first teams reached the outskirts of the target area, they had faced relentless challenges and had adapted to each one. The situation was still fluid and dangerous, but the operatives had gained critical advantage. They were in position, ready to confront whatever awaited them. Every member knew that the next phase would be even more intense, that they would be tested in ways that required every skill they had honed over years of training. Yet, there was a quiet confidence. Despite the unknown, the extreme conditions, and the apparent danger, they had made it this far and they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The distress signal had done its work. It had alerted humanity's deadliest warriors, bringing them from quiet lives into the heart of danger. It had turned preparation into a race against time, forcing operatives to move across extreme terrain, adapt to unpredictable challenges, and anticipate threats that could come from any direction. The journey itself had tested their limits, physically and mentally, and had forged a readiness that no ordinary mission could achieve. As they prepared to move into the heart of the danger zone, there was a shared understanding among the teams. The situation would demand everything they had. Courage alone would not be enough. Precision, skill, strategy, and adaptability would determine success. Every decision would matter, and every action could mean the difference between life and death for those trapped in the crisis. The journey had been grueling, the challenges relentless, but the warriors had proven themselves ready. They had survived the obstacles, adapted to changing conditions, and maintained focus under extreme pressure. Now, the real test was about to begin. The night was still, but tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Ahead lay unknown dangers, hostile forces, and potentially life-threatening conditions. Behind them lay the distant safety of their bases, a reminder of everything they had risked to answer this call. Every operative knew that failure was not an option. The journey had been long, exhausting, and dangerous, but it had brought them to the edge of the mission's critical phase. The distress call had awakened the deadliest warriors humanity had ever trained, and now they were poised to face the ultimate challenge, reaching the heart of the danger, saving lives, and confronting threats that no one else could handle. By the time the elite teams reached the outskirts of the target zone, the scene before them was more chaotic than anyone could have imagined. Smoke rose from multiple locations, curling into the sky in thick black plumes. Fires burned in abandoned buildings, and the distant sounds of explosions echoed across the terrain. Vehicles lay overturned, scattered debris marked the streets, and every sign suggested that this area had been under attack for hours, if not days. Civilians were trapped, hiding wherever they could find shelter, their faces etched with fear and desperation. The distress call had hinted at danger, but the reality was far more intense. The warriors took a moment to assess the situation. Their training emphasized observation and planning before action. Even in extreme circumstances, they scanned the terrain, identifying entry points, potential threats, and areas where the most vulnerable people were likely trapped. The hostile forces occupying the area were not waiting passively. Scouts and snipers were positioned to control movement, creating deadly Every decision the teams made now would carry immediate consequences. One wrong move could cost lives of both the civilians and the operatives themselves. Despite the intensity, the teams moved with remarkable precision. Each member had a role that was drilled into them through years of experience. Some formed reconnaissance squads, moving silently ahead to gather information about enemy positions, patrol routes, and hidden dangers. Others were prepared to enter buildings, neutralize threats, and secure safe zones for trapped civilians. Medics stayed close to anticipate injuries and provide immediate care in the most chaotic conditions. Every action was coordinated, seamless, and almost instinctive, a dance of skill and timing. In the middle of what seemed like utter chaos, the first obstacles came quickly. As they moved toward the most critical areas, the warriors encountered ambush points, booby traps, and makeshift barricades designed to slow down any rescuers. Explosives were planted strategically, forcing the operatives to act quickly and decisively. Demolition experts carefully disarmed these threats while others maintained perimeter security, ensuring no enemy could flank them. The tension was constant, and the margin for error was raised. Every second counted, and the operatives knew that hesitation could be deadly as they advanced. The teams also encountered civilians in need. Families huddled in basements, children clung to their parents, and the elderly were too weak to move on their own. These warriors had trained for combat, for survival, and for extreme danger, but rescuing frightened civilians under hostile conditions required a different kind of skill, patience, and reassurance. They guided people through dangerous paths, carried those who could not walk, and maintained communication to ensure everyone was accounted for. Each rescued life strengthened their resolve, reminding them of why they risked everything in these missions. The hostile forces proved to be highly organized and relentless. They used the terrain to their advantage, firing from concealed positions, attempting to isolate operatives from each other, and setting traps that forced constant vigilance. The teams had to rely not just on brute force but on strategy, intelligence, and teamwork. Communication became a lifeline. Hand signals, whispered commands, and prearranged codes ensured that every action was coordinated, even when voices could not be heard over gunfire and explosions. Despite the danger, the warriors pressed on. They adapted to every situation with speed and precision. Buildings were cleared methodically, enemies were neutralized, and civilians were brought to safe zones. Each obstacle was met with skill and determination. There were moments of intense pressure when the operatives faced multiple threats simultaneously: a sniper firing from a distant rooftop, an armed enemy rushing from a side street, and civilians in immediate danger. In those moments, training and instinct took over. Decisions that might have seemed impossible in theory were executed flawlessly, saving lives and maintaining control of the situation. The chaos of the environment did not stop the teams from observing and understanding the bigger picture. While their immediate focus was on neutralizing threats and rescuing civilians, they also gathered critical intelligence. Documents, communications, equipment, and signs of enemy organization were collected, providing insight into why this attack had happened and who was behind it. Every piece of information was valuable, and the operatives knew that it could prevent further attacks or save more lives in the future. Their mission was not just about the immediate crisis but also about securing long-term safety. As the night deepened, the difficulty of the mission increased. Darkness concealed dangers, but it also gave the operatives an advantage. Moving under cover of night allowed them to approach enemy positions without being detected. Yet it required constant vigilance. Night vision equipment revealed hidden threats, and silent movements ensured that the enemy could not anticipate their approach. Every team member relied on the others implicitly, trusting that each person would execute their role perfectly. This level of trust was built over years of training, and it was now being tested under real, life-threatening conditions. There were moments of human connection that reminded everyone of the stakes. Civilians who had been rescued thanked the operatives with tearful eyes, holding hands, and sometimes quietly whispering prayers. These small gestures carried enormous weight, reinforcing the warriors' determination to continue, no matter the danger. It was a reminder that the lives at stake were not numbers on a screen but real people, children, and communities depending on their skill and courage. Even with some progress made, the situation remained unpredictable. Enemy reinforcements appeared sporadically, forcing the teams to split their attention between immediate threats and overall mission strategy. They had to ensure that safe zones remained secure, that civilians were continually moved to safety, and that every action contributed to neutralizing the larger danger. Each team moved as a single unit, combining force, strategy, and intelligence to maintain control in an environment that constantly threatened to overwhelm them. Despite exhaustion, stress, and the constant danger, the warriors never lost focus. They had trained for moments like this, where skill, courage, and determination were tested simultaneously. Their resilience was remarkable. They moved swiftly, adapted instantly, and maintained composure under pressure. Every second brought them closer to completing the mission, to rescuing those in immediate danger, and to gathering the intelligence necessary to understand and stop the threats they faced. By the end of the night, the elite teams had accomplished what seemed impossible. Hostile forces had been neutralized, civilians were safe in secure zones, and critical intelligence had been collected. The chaos that had initially seemed overwhelming was now under control, thanks to the combination of skill, courage, and relentless determination of the operatives. Yet, even as they rested briefly, they knew that the mission was not over. The operation had revealed the scale of the threat, and further actions would be necessary to ensure complete safety. The distress call that had first awakened these warriors had brought them into the heart of danger. It had forced them to navigate extreme conditions, confront highly organized enemies, and make life-or-death decisions with precision and speed. The mission had tested every limit, physically, mentally, and emotionally, but the operatives had proven their extraordinary capability. They had turned chaos into order, fear into action, and danger into an opportunity to save lives. As dawn approached, the teams took stock of their progress. The area was still dangerous, but civilians were secure, enemies were contained, and the mission was proceeding according to plan. Every member knew that their actions had made a difference, that the lives they had saved were a testament to their training, courage, and unwavering dedication. The mission had pushed them to the edge, but it had also highlighted the extraordinary strength of humanity when skill, teamwork, and determination come together. The warriors had entered the chaos, fully aware of the risks, and they had emerged having accomplished something extraordinary. The mission had demanded everything they had to offer, yet they had met the challenge with courage, intelligence, and precision. The distress call that had sounded faint and urgent hours earlier had now been answered fully. It had led humanity's deadliest warriors into a situation of unimaginable danger, and they had risen to meet it, turning a desperate call for help into a story of resilience, a skill, and heroism that few would ever fully understand. After hours of relentless effort, the elite teams finally completed the most critical phase of their mission. The chaos that had initially greeted them, the smoke, the destruction, the fear in the eyes of civilians had been contained. Lives had been saved, enemies neutralized, and the immediate threats had been dealt with. Yet even as relief began to settle, the operatives knew that their work was far from over. Their mission wasn't just about surviving the danger. It was about understanding what had happened, preventing it from happening again, and ensuring that the safety of those involved was secured for the long term. The aftermath of the operation was intense. Civilians, once terrified and trapped, were guided to temporary shelters where they could rest, eat, and recover. The operatives made sure that every person had access to food, water, and medical attention. Families who had been separated during the chaos were reunited, sometimes in tearful, emotional moments. These small victories were as important as the larger mission itself. For the warriors, seeing hope return to the faces of those they had rescued was a reminder of why they endured the dangers, why they answered the call without hesitation, and why their skills were worth every sacrifice while civilians were being cared for. The teams turned their attention to the larger picture. Intelligence gathered during the mission revealed the true scale of the threat. Documents, communication devices, and intercepted messages provided insight into the planning and intent of those who had orchestrated the chaos. The operatives analyzed patterns, locations, and possible future targets. Every piece of information mattered, not just for completing the mission but for preventing further attacks. Their actions during the operation had already disrupted immediate plans, but the intelligence they now held ensured that any remaining threats could be neutralized before they could escalate. Even in the midst of relief, the teams remained vigilant. They knew that danger could appear at any moment, that hostile forces could regroup, and that environmental hazards might still pose a threat. Their training had taught them to expect the unexpected, to remain alert even when it seemed the crisis had passed. Teams moved through the area systematically, ensuring that every building, street, and path was secure. Every operative understood the balance between action and patience. Too aggressive, and they risked unnecessary confrontation. Too passive, and the remaining dangers could regain control. The careful, methodical approach allowed them to maintain order while keeping civilians safe. Amid the ongoing operations, the emotional toll of the mission became apparent. The warriors themselves were not immune to the strain. Hours of sleep deprivation, physical exertion, and constant stress had tested their limits. Yet, through exhaustion, they continued with focus and determination. There were moments of quiet reflection, small pauses when operatives exchanged brief words, shared water, or simply looked at the people they had saved. These moments reminded them that their efforts were not in vain. Every life saved, every threat neutralized, reinforced the value of their training and the importance of their dedication. As the mission wound down, the operatives faced the complex task of organizing their exit. Civilians had been secured, intelligence had been collected, and hostile forces were either contained or eliminated. Yet leaving the area required careful planning. Extraction routes had to be safe, transport vehicles needed to be ready, and communication with command centers had to remain secure. The teams worked in synchronization, moving through the terrain efficiently while maintaining vigilance. The operation demanded the same precision on the way out as it had on the way in, and the warriors executed it flawlessly, ensuring that no one was left behind and that the area remained secure during the final stages. The operatives also took time to document what had happened. Reports were filed, photographs taken, and observations recorded. While the public would never know the details, this documentation would serve as a reference for future missions and for understanding the broader implications of the crisis they had confronted. It was a meticulous process, balancing speed with accuracy, ensuring that every detail was preserved. These records would later help prevent similar threats and would provide invaluable insight for intelligence agencies around the world. As the day progressed, the gravity of the mission began to settle in. The distress call that had first awakened the elite warriors had led them into a situation that tested every skill, every ounce of courage, and every instinct they had ever honed. The danger had been extreme, the environment hostile, and the stakes unimaginably high. And yet, through it all, they had succeeded. Lives had been saved, threats neutralized, and the immediate crisis resolved. The sense of accomplishment was quiet but profound, felt in the small nods exchanged between operatives and the shared understanding that they had achieved something extraordinary. Returning to their bases, the warriors resumed their normal lives, but nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Most of their work would remain classified, invisible to the public, and unrecognized by the world at large. Yet the satisfaction of knowing they had prevented disaster, saved lives, and confronted dangers that most people couldn't even imagine was enough. For these operatives, the mission was never about recognition or fame. It was about action, courage, and the responsibility to respond when humanity needed them most. The aftermath also brought reflection on the broader meaning of their work. They had been awakened by a single distress signal, a faint and urgent message that might have gone unnoticed under different circumstances. That signal had set in motion a chain of events that demonstrated the importance of readiness, skill, and rapid response. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, human courage and expertise could change outcomes. One small call for help had unleashed the capabilities of people who were prepared to face the impossible, and the world was safer because of it. The operation also underscored the interdependence of teamwork, strategy, and individual skill. While each operative was capable of extraordinary feats alone, it was their coordination, trust, and shared purpose that made the mission successful. From reconnaissance to assault, from medical care to intelligence gathering, every role had been crucial. The success of the mission was not just about individual heroism but about the synergy of skill, preparation, and collective determination. Even as the warriors returned to secrecy, the impact of the mission lingered. Civilians who had been saved would carry memories of their protectors, stories of courage and bravery that might one day be shared. Intelligence gathered would prevent further harm, and the lessons learned would inform future operations. The ripple effect of their actions extended far beyond the immediate crisis, influencing security, preparedness, and the broader safety of communities. Finally, the operatives reflected on the human aspect of their work. They had faced extreme danger, risked their lives, and confronted chaos, but they had also witnessed resilience, courage, and hope among the people they had saved. These moments of human connection, the tearful gratitude, the relief, and the small gestures of appreciation, reminded them that their sacrifices were meaningful. Their training, their skill, and their bravery had tangible results: lives saved and futures preserved. The distress call that had sounded so faint and urgent hours earlier had now been fully answered. It had brought humanity's deadliest warriors into action, forcing them to navigate extreme danger, unpredictable terrain, and hostile forces. It had tested their physical and mental limits, their courage, and their decision. And when the operation concluded, it left behind a story of resilience, determination, and skill that few would ever know in detail, but whose effects would be felt by those whose lives were changed forever. As the teams finally returned to hidden bases, they allowed themselves a moment of quiet satisfaction. The mission was complete. Lives had been saved. Threats had been neutralized. The world continued, largely unaware of how close it had come to disaster. Yet for the operatives, the experience reaffirmed everything they had trained for, everything they had risked, and everything they were willing to do again. In the end, the faint distress signal that had awakened them had not only called them to action but had also reminded them and the world of the extraordinary potential of courage, skill, and human determination in the face of unimaginable danger.